Awesome. So in the interest of time, we can get rolling. Thank you everybody for being here. Really excited today to be talking to you all about rapid resolution, sometimes called housing problem solving, sometimes called problem solving, a lot of different names out there for this. My name's Kevin Kelly. I am a program officer here at Host, and I'm going to be presenting with my coworker, Dave Riggs. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, that was fabulous, Kevin. I'm also a program officer at Host on Midori's team, and we each have kind of a different portfolio of projects that we work on, so you may or may not run into us depending on what you're doing.
Thanks, Dave. And if you can go to the next slide. Perfect. So what is rapid resolution? Rapid resolution, it's a pretty wide-ranging model that is used throughout the country to help folks harness their own protective factors, their own strengths that they have to solve a bout of homelessness or housing instability with kind of minimal touches. So we'll get into kind of like what an ideal candidate for rapid resolution is in just a minute. But really, it's all kind of based around flexibility and really harnessing what that person already has going for them with maybe some minimal touches from us on the case management side. And really helps kind of circumnavigate or circumvent a lot of the like missing resources out there in the community. So typically when we're talking about rapid resolution funds, it's very flexible funding. The city right now operates rapid resolution programs with 10 providers. It's something that really anybody can incorporate if you have any sort of participant support dollars, you can use those towards this model. So this is something really anybody can incorporate, but it's something we're really looking at in the city to help alleviate some of the pressures that have fallen on our homelessness providers over the last couple of years through COVID and through all of the other things that have been going on. And Dave, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So it's really meant to be a paradigm shift in how we're approaching services for folks. It's all based on problem solving and working with an individual or family through basic case management skills, active listening, exploring what their options are, exploring what supports they have, done in a progressive engagement factor. So if you heard our colleague Kelsey's presentation yesterday on progressive engagement, very much ties into that. We want to be screening folks for rapid resolution throughout their journey in housing instability and homelessness. So it's something that would be done at the intake process and then throughout their time in whatever the program is, whether it's a shelter, a rapid rehousing program, transitional housing, or a micro community or hotel that people may be staying. Very much want this to be a person-centered focus. The kind of central belief of rapid resolution is that most people really have pretty much everything they need to self-resolve their bout of housing instability or homelessness. Sometimes they just need to help walk through those different options that they may have and might need just a little bit of light support, whether that is financially, some sort of resource, or just through basic case management. Next slide, please. So who is rapid resolution a fit for? And I think this is probably one of the bigger differentiating factors of the model from others. It's really meant for an individual or family who, again, don't require a ton of intervention. So these are folks who have a lot going for them. They maybe have a job, they maybe have some sort of income outside of employment. They have family or somebody else that they can, or relationships that they can leverage to help them resolve their bout of housing instability or homelessness. And it's really meant for people who are maybe not the most high need. So like when we think of the VI SPDAT, if folks are familiar with that, that measures how high risk you are as a person and tries to get the most high risk people into housing. that sometimes can allow some folks to fall through the cracks who are like not super high risk, but just are missing those few kind of key supports to get them out of a bad situation. That's who this model is for. It's really meant to be a safety net for those groups. And it also solves problems for those groups so that we can focus resources on people who do have higher needs through more in-depth programs like rapid rehousing or transitional housing and things like that. So it's a relatively small amount of folks too, we estimate, and what we've seen kind of nationally, this is a nationally used model, typically like 5% to 10% of folks are a good fit for this. So that's usually what we shoot for with our contracts. Like if you're operating a shelter and you're screening folks as they're coming in at their intake to see if they're a good fit for rapid resolution, we would estimate that about 5 to 10% of them would be a good fit. Next slide, please. So there's three key interventions that go into rapid resolution. Those are prevention. Prevention is really all about keeping somebody who is currently housed that way. They maybe have come across some sort of emergency that is threatening their current housing situation, and we need to do something and work with them to keep them in place. Diversion happens really at the entrance of the shelter system, whether that's congregate or non-congregate. Diversion really means we are implementing some sort of resource to keep a person or family from having to enter into the shelter system. And then lastly, we have rapid exit. So this is when somebody has entered into the shelter system or the homelessness intervention system. Can we get them out of the system as quickly as possible? Typically, we shoot for about 3 months or less with rapid resolution. It's definitely not a hard and fast rule, but usually that's what we see. And really kind of the key factors for all of these interventions are we want to minimize, obviously we want to harness those supports that a person already has while minimizing the just the trauma that comes along with housing instability or homelessness. One of the other key tenets of this model is that it is when somebody is in this state of not knowing what's going to happen with their housing, that is a very acute emergency and can cause a lot of trauma for an individual. So we want to minimize that as much as possible because we know that the longer somebody experiences that, the worse off they are and the harder it is to exit homelessness. So timing is definitely a key factor when we're thinking about this model. Next slide, please. This slide here, if you take away anything from today, I would definitely say go back to this slide. I think this does a really good job of highlighting how rapid resolution, and on this slide, it's called problem solving. I think I stole this from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. They call it problem solving, so it's those purple arrows. And it really shows how these interventions happen throughout the system. So on the left side, if you're looking at it, that is the kind of where prevention starts. It is where somebody is housed or just about to lose their housing. And then we work our way through with kind of the emergency shelter type stuff and street outreach being more in the middle, which is where we'll see more things like diversion. Then again, rapid exit once somebody has entered into those in the middle part. And then you can also see more prevention happening at the back end. And we'll get into kind of what that means later on in the slides, but definitely a very helpful kind of high level view of how this model impacts the entire system. Next slide, please. So the next, or to kind of dive into the actual interventions, the first one we want to talk about is prevention. So prevention, again, happens when somebody is housed and we want to keep them that way. So maybe an example of where prevention is going to work best is if somebody reaches out to us and they say like, hey, I have not lost my housing, but I have no idea how I'm going to pay my February rent. My car just broke down. I need that to get to work. And I just don't know how I'm going to get my catalytic converter replaced because it blew out on me. So this is where prevention can take shape. So we can work with that person in a number of ways and really kind of build on their supports. So in this case, it's great that person has a job, they have a vehicle, but the vehicle has experience this maintenance issue. So we have a couple different options that we could look at to try to keep this person housed. And Dave, if you want to go to the next slide, we can kind of show some of them. But what this would look like in kind of this particular situation is we would want to talk with this person, figure out like, hey, what are some of our options? We would start making a list, and we could say like, okay, could we talk to your landlord about saying like, all right, Kevin has $500 of the $1,000 rent that he owes, but he needs that $500 to go towards rent. Could we forgo rent payment this month and then pay an extra $100 a month for the next 10 months to cover that? Or if you have the option, you could also just offer to help pay for the car repair, or offer to pay a portion of that person's rent. These are all examples of what prevention could look like, and we would make out a list as we're talking with me in this particular situation, and then figure out what's the best option for me on that list. So that's kind of like a very classic example of prevention, and it's really something this slide kind of encapsulates it. It's something that can look across the system, like this person's housing, this person's employment, family resources, all of those things should be considered. Landlord mediation is definitely a big part of it. It's something that if we as a case manager can work with a landlord and try to figure out some alternatives to payment and making sure that that person can stay there, that's beneficial to us and to the landlord. They don't have to go through the eviction process. They will eventually get paid one way or the other, and it helps us keep that person in place and from experiencing the trauma of having to go through housing instability and then hopefully avoid homelessness outright. And then the last thing on the practices of this, prevention also can get pretty high level. It's something that also includes things like building out more affordable housing, things that happen more at the state, local, and federal levels. So definitely something to keep an eye on there too. Next slide, please. So this is a good, again, coming back to this really good diagram of how this fits in. So prevention obviously fits in when somebody's housed at that first section, that red box on the left, but it can also be utilized in the other end of the spectrum on the right end when we're getting people who have been engaged in more in-depth programming, like rapid rehousing is very common to use prevention to help keep people housed. So what that would look like, and some of our local organizations do a phenomenal job with backstopping their rapid rehousing participants with rapid resolution dollars. How it looks is, so say I was a rapid rehousing participant, I got housed through it, but my time has ended in the program. I'm no longer eligible for rental assistance, but some emergency has come up and I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. Our providers with rapid resolution dollars are using those dollars to help provide rental assistance for somebody who was in a rapid rehousing program, is still getting the follow-along services, but doesn't qualify for rental assistance anymore. So it keeps that person housed and keeps them in a stable position while they overcome that, whatever that emergency is. Could be the car, could be a loss of employment, that sort of thing. All right, we can go to the next slide, please. Cool. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dave to talk about diversion.
Thanks, Kevin. So Kevin just kind of a great overview of the whole thing that we're talking about today and these different intervention types, and went through prevention as well. So I'm going to be talking about the next couple. So diversion, and what I like about all this actually is it's pretty much all exactly what it sounds like, right? So diversion is trying to divert somebody from even entering into the shelter system. So like the slide talks about, this can happen at exactly the front door of a shelter, for instance. It could start with your first intake with the person. And the ideal is to have 0 days in the shelter system. We're really trying to avoid that if possible. What diversion can actually look like Kevin was saying before, with all of this, it can be a conversation with the person and focusing on what sort of strengths, what assets this person has. For example, do they have friends or family that they've lived with in the past or they could live with at this time? Is there that potential for reunification? And want to emphasize that diversion is not meant to just turn people away at that front door either. So if somebody wants to enter the shelter system, then of course they should be able to do that. If you are exploring reunification with family or friends, be sure to screen for safety, safety from domestic violence or exploitation. That needs to be a key part of that process. And lastly, this often requires some financial resources. So the most common, and it's often the cheapest too, could be a Greyhound ticket somewhere, right? So you are doing that reunification process, and you learn there's a brother or sister in Nebraska that could be a fit. You confirm that it's safe from domestic violence and exploitation, and you're making that happen. And the only cost ends up being a Greyhound ticket over there. So that could be a great and super simple intervention that's cheap. Paying arrears happens quite a bit. Somebody owes rent somewhere, and so they aren't able to get into a new place until that's cleared up. Deposit help may be another example. And lastly, sometimes there's motel or hotel costs if somebody is waiting for like a new lease to happen, like they have that in process, but they are homeless in between now and when that starts. This is that overview map that Kevin was talking about, and just wanted to show you here, you can see where diversion lands in this whole thing. So we are getting much closer to the middle of our map here. You can see it's at that front door of the emergency shelter, and then even can be street outreach before somebody even gets to a shelter or a facility like that. The last intervention strategy that we're talking about is rapid exit. And this is similar to diversion, but these are folks who have entered the sheltering system, and we're trying to make that stay as short as possible. So like an example I can think of would be, say you have done your intake with somebody and maybe they weren't the most forthcoming, they have to warm up to you. And so other times that you have seen them during the week, you start to have other conversations with them, and they do open up and they mention that sibling that they have that might be a place where they could stay. So then you are in this last intervention type where you're trying to make this experience of homelessness as short as possible. And again, want to emphasize, much like diversion, you're not trying to keep somebody from entering the shelter system. This is rapid exit is not a way to get rid of somebody who is being problematic at your shelter or kick somebody out. It is a means to resolve their experience. And then lastly, this map, again, going back to this overview slide, we can see where rapid exit is. So this person is in an emergency shelter, or they're experiencing homelessness out on the street. And you are trying to make this experience of homelessness as short as you can. I'm going to pass it back over to Kevin to talk about why rapid resolution.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing the biggest reason to implement rapid resolution is really how person-centered it is and how much it helps people avoid the unnecessary trauma that can come along with experiencing housing instability or homelessness. It's something that's pretty well documented. The longer somebody is experiencing, whether it's sheltered or unsheltered homelessness, the harder it is to get out. You just have so much more stacked against you day after day, month after month. If we can get folks out quickly, they tend to stabilize on their own, and it tends to be something that's long lasting. So this is something that really makes this model super useful in how quickly it is and how flexible the dollars are too. It's something that's pretty light touch and really doesn't cost a lot. Like Dave was saying, like Greyhound tickets, not that expensive compared to having somebody have to stay in a shelter for a long period of time. And that has those benefits obviously for that person, but it also helps preserve those limited resources who can go towards somebody who unfortunately doesn't have those supports and needs a little bit more in terms of case management, in terms of intensive care. And then the last thing is it's also helpful to reduce staff burnout. One, because we're just keeping more folks out of the system. We're getting them more into their community where they get support. So that's one less person that our staffs have to handle. And it also is very flexible, which if you've worked as a case manager before and you've worked in some of the more rigid programs, I oversee some of our federal ones. It's very structured and strict on what you can spend dollars on. And that makes it really tough. And that can be really frustrating for case managers. The nice thing about rapid resolution is it is very flexible. I have staff from our providers who are operating these programs reach out all the time saying like, hey, can we use money in this creative way? Can we use it in that creative way? And almost always we're able to say yes, which is great to be able to do that. It's super helpful for that person, and it's super helpful for that case manager to empower them to do their jobs in a creative way. So it's definitely a model we would highly recommend you think about implementing within your own work. And Dave, if you want to go on to the next slide. If it's something you're interested in and you want to learn more, we know this was a very high overview presentation. We operate a monthly meeting that provides support and technical assistance for people who are offering rapid resolution within their whatever part of the system they work in. We just started it a couple months ago, so we've been doing some more in-depth trainings that I'm happy to send you. I was going to try to share them in the in the chat here, but it won't let me add documents, I think, because it's an external thing. So if you're interested in those, please let me know. We have everything from how to incorporate this into your intake, some information on how to best capture data, how to go about actually like doing rapid resolution at a one-on-one level. Like what does the conversations look like? What do interventions look like? Much more nuanced. So definitely reach out if you're interested in that. I'll throw my email in the chat. Or if you want to join those meetings, we provide those trainings there, but we'll also be providing case conferencing and walking through any challenges people are experiencing, and also sharing out any ideas and resources folks are coming up with as well. So yeah, with that, we can open it up to any questions y'all may have.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for the presentation. This is Ty with Jewish Family Service. My question was, since we're a rapid rehousing program that doesn't have rapid resolution built in, I was wondering if you had any recommendations on strategies or other agencies that would be good to partner with as almost like a warm handoff from rapid rehousing to rapid resolution as sort of a backup for those families exiting that kind of programming.
Definitely. Good to see you, Ty. It's a great question. So if you don't have the funds to implement that for especially for rapid rehousing, I would recommend reaching out to me. And this is actually something Liz Carchidi from JFS has done in the past. And just let me know a little bit more. Sorry, the vacuum in the back, but let me know some more specifics about the individual or family you're looking for. Our 10 providers that we're working with are happy to take referrals. It's just helpful to have a little bit of background information so we can send people to the right organization that's a good fit for them. So if it's a family, we know where we can send them. If it's a senior, we know where we can send them. So yeah, just reach out and we'll do our best to connect you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Kevin, my name is Erin. I am a housing navigator with Colorado Poverty Law Project, and we help people try and make their homelessness brief and short by getting them into new housing right away. However, we do have some clients where after a few months they leave, their apartment, and while they don't owe anything and avoided eviction, and they don't owe any arrears, they are getting charged for damages. I'm curious if that's something that this would cover. A lot of rent assistance programs do not cover it, and also it could have happened in Adams County or other counties, but it is preventing them from getting into any sort of housing, specifically HUD housing. And this specific client that I'm thinking of actually was selected for housing choice voucher. So I was thinking like, this is perfect because maybe we can find, a private landlord that would be willing. But even in the HUD paperwork that she was signing, it said you will most likely be denied if you still owe to any Section 8 property in the past. So I'm curious, outside of just arrears in the formal sense of you owing back rent, if it would cover damages and things like that.
Yeah, great to meet you, Aaron. Absolutely. So our kind of threshold, sorry for the noise. Our threshold for this really is if we can use these funds to get somebody housed, we will use them. So we've used them in the past for exactly what you're talking about, damages. If it turns into something that's a little bit more challenge, like it sounds like in your situation, we could just pay the damages with these funds and that would be totally fine. We could also do the inverse where we could pay somebody's rent while they're using their own funds to pay down those damages if that would be a better fit for that person. So I think either or would definitely be eligible for rapid resolution dollars.
And is that specific to Denver? Like, would they have to have lived in Denver? Is that because she lived in Adams County before? So I'm curious, but it's preventing her from getting into a place in Denver.
Yeah, so that would be fine.
Okay.
So that's always a good question. So in that situation, yes, absolutely. And then if you were thinking more about like somebody who was trying to leave Denver to say they were getting affordable housing in Adams County, if you had the inverse, we could also support that because the whole goal is to keep that person from experiencing homelessness in Denver. But if we need to expand that out, that's totally fine.